It is well known that during the period of the early Severans, the number of provincial mints over the empire, sorry, I can't move my slide. Oh, there, okay. All over the empire showed a considerable increase. In the Peloponnese, however, we could speak not of an increase, but of an outburst of minting with 45 workshops. And you can see on this slide the way that the coinage evolved in the Peloponnese and the explosion of minting you have in the Severan period. These mints include the two colonies of Corinth and Patras, large and well-populated cities such as Argos, Megalopolis here in the center, Messini and Sparta, but also many small and obscure settlements known only from a few phrases in Pausanias. The three polis in the Megaris here, as well as the islands of Aegina here and Zakynthos, which is a little bit out of this map to the west, also belong to the Peloponnesian group. Most of these cities had been members of the Achaean koinon of the Hellenistic period. The Severan issues of the Peloponnese were inaugurated at Argos with a very rare issue in the name of Pescennius Niger that must be dated between his acclamation as king in Syria in spring 193 and his death in spring 194. Just after his victory over Niger, Septimius Severus obtained the title Imperator III, which is found on the first Severan issues of Corinth. This numismatic evidence reveals a fact not known from other sources, that Argos and Corinth took opposing sides during the civil war. All the other workshops started coining after the end of the civil wars and the rise up to power of Septimius Severus around 196. The production of Severan issues in the Peloponnesian cities was mostly limited to the years 196 to 205, after when minting practically ceased. Even Corinth stopped minting. Patras continued for a very few years. The Lacedaemonians produced an isolated issue under Gallienus, and only Argos continued a regular production in the 3rd century. The intense monetary production of the decade 196-205 was a regional phenomenon that was limited to the Peloponnese and did not affect the entire province of Achaia. Various interpretations have been suggested for this outburst, most of them military, although I believe that we do not have yet a definite answer to this question. But this would be the topic of another talk. Iconography is what we are concerned with here today. Although imperial portraits monopolized the obverse of Peloponnesian coins, hundreds of different types illustrated their reverses, and even the iconography of the smallest towns were characterized by impressive variety and originality. In this sense, Peloponnesian coinage differed radically to coinages of other Balkan regions, such as Macedonia, where even the major towns, including the capital of the province, Thessaloniki, used a very limited iconographic palette. The Peloponnesian issues showed a closer resemblance to the provincial issues on Asia Minor in this respect. Most of the types illustrated on the Peloponnesian coins were religious and showed a special emphasis on locality and the individual and identity of cities through very specific reference to local religion and mythology. Representations of deities or their shrines, mythological episodes, agonistic themes, and references to religious rituals make up the vast majority of this iconography. Direct references to the emperor or Roman-inspired types are extremely rare and limited to the cities on the northern coast, the southern coast of the Corinthian Gulf, the itinerary from Italy to the east. The Corinthian Gulf was the main road from Italy to Greece, and this is why all these ports on this coast were so important, because that's where the boats arrived. We must imagine that we're in a period where the isthmus was not yet an isthmus. Of course, there was a continuity of land here. Boats could not go past. Our intention in this talk is to focus on certain examples of religious and mythological scenes, representations of local cults, rituals, and games, which form one of the most striking elements of this coinage. The use of local mythology to construct the civic identity of communities in the high imperial period is a well-known phenomenon. The compiling of mythological anthologies from the late Hellenistic period onwards, and especially in the imperial era, is an element that points to the same direction. Very few of these manuals have been preserved, the most important of which seems to have been the library attributed to Apollodorus, but composed in the 1st or 2nd century AD. The intellectual milieu of the second sophistics certainly contributed to the spread of this practice, which remained vibrant under the Severans. The revival of religious memory can be seen in several aspects of civic life. The great families reconstructed their genealogies by claiming heroic or even divine ancestry. They chose the names of their ancestral heroes for their children and paid homage to the names of local deities. As far as the Peloponnese is concerned, the role of religious memory in civic life has been studied systematically by Yves Lafont, whose arguments are based primarily on epigraphic material. You see here 2 publications, a book and an article in French, which are specific for the Peloponnese, in a sense quite interesting. In the case of the Severan Peloponnese, the testimony of coins provides extremely rich additional material, which is not always easy to interpret. There are iconographical types that would be impossible to decipher without the support of literary sources. And there are others that remain enigmatic because we do not have the necessary sources to understand them. And naturally, Pausanias Periidices would be the most important source. A traveler's guide, we could call it, that was composed only about 50 years before the issues we are discussing. Although written sources are necessary for the interpretation of obscure types, even in the case of easily identifiable images, the understanding of the city's religious background is important. An Athena of the coins of Agyra, for example, was a different Athena to that of Aegea. Even if they share the same, very common in this case, iconographic type, they had a different religious significance that was familiar to the people who used the coins and saw these images in their everyday life. We would like to begin our own periodicis of this interesting coinage with 2 examples from the important city of Argos, whose coins have been the subject of a detailed study by Patrick Marchetti and Christophe Lamont. They have written a book on this coinage. We have a purpose of the Argos. For the educated audience of the imperial era, Argos was known for its prominent position in Greek mythology, as well as for its celebration of the Nemean and Nerean games. 2 myths that originated in different mythological cycles but took place in Nemea appear on coins of Argos. The first is a scene easy to recognize, the one we have on our screen. Heracles fighting the Nemean lion with his bare hands, since the animal was thought to be invulnerable to weapons. According to the myth, the fight took place in a cave in the mountains, not far from Nemea, which people were still proud to show off in Pausanias' time. Heracles, the Peloponnesian hero par excellence, established the Nemean games in honor of Zeus after killing the lion. The second Nemean myth that appears on Argive coins is that of Opheltis. Opheltis was the child of Lycurgus, king of Nemea. According to a divine oracle, the child should not be placed on the ground before he could walk. When Adrastos, king of Argos, and his companions arrived in Nemea on their war against Thebes, they met the nurse Ipsipyle and asked her for water. The nurse led them to a spring hidden behind a bush and laid the child on celery leaves to offer water to the travelers. The dragon protecting the spring appeared and killed the king's son. When the 7 kings became aware of the tragedy, they eliminated the monster after the battle and buried the child near the sanctuary of Nemean Zeus. They then established the Nemean games to appease the god. The myth is known in detail from Pseudo-Apollodorus and is mentioned briefly by Pausanias. Several iconographic variations on the Argive coins allude to this myth. Ero fighting a snake, Ipsipili running away from the dragon, you can see her here. The sleeping child attacked by the dragon, or the very unusual image of Ipsipili kneeling beside the dragon that holds Opheltis in its coils. You can see the small baby here, you can barely decipher it. The common ground of both these myths is their connection with the foundation of the Nemean Games, and it is interesting that the city used both traditions to emphasize its control over them. The celebration of the Nemean Games at Argos under the Severans is directly attested by a coin type that alludes to them. As shown by the reverse with the legend Nemia in a celery wreath and coins of Argos. The ethnic megalopoliton surrounding the laurel wreath with the legend Lycia on a similar type at Megalopolis shows the city's interest in emphasizing its ownership over the games. The Lycia, festivals in honor of Zeus Lycios, once celebrated on the summit of Mount Lycion in Arcadia, had by the time of Pausanias already been transferred to the Agora of Megalopolis. The Argive Hera, goddess of the Heraclids, was worshipped at the Iraeon, located between Mycenae and Argos. On Argive coins, the goddess is crowned and seated on a throne, resting her right hand on a scepter, and in some cases holding a pomegranate in her left. Even if not an exact copy, this type certainly alluded to the ancient statue of Hera, work of the famous sculptor Polykleitos. An interesting detail that appears on few rare examples, notably a shield placed under the goddess' throne, is worth mentioning. Could this be the Argive shield, the prize for the young hoplites in the games? This prize was so famous that in imperial times the expression iexaru aspis, meaning the shield of Argos, came to mean the contest itself. Every 4 years, the Nemea and the Iria were celebrated together at Argos, the latter just after the former. One Agonathetes were responsible for the two contests, and the Elenodikes of the Nemea were also in charge of the Iria. This joint celebration is commemorated on coins of the city that show an agonistic table with the attributes of both divinities, the eagle of Zeus to the right and the peacock of Hera to the left. Now, if we leave the Arpolid to visit Arcadia, we come across an extraordinary, enigmatic, and rare type at Mantinia. It depicts a rider mounted on 2 seahorses. You can see here the ears of the strange tail, and hunting and hurling a trident. Here, this is a bad photo. This is a unique coin, and this is the only photo we have of it actually. In front of him, a naked man is running and trying to escape from his pursuer with his head turned towards the rider. On the right, the representation of a tree emphasizes that the scene took place in a wood. This is certainly reference to some myth, but the scene is not easily recognizable. The first figure, the rider, undoubtedly represents Poseidon, a god associated with the seahorse in archaic times. But it was especially in the Roman period that the image of Poseidon as on a chariot pulled by seahorses became widespread on mosaics and sarcophagi. On coins from Corinth, the god is also depicted riding a biga of seahorses. The seahorse is a mythical being that evokes the god's role as a protector of the sea, but also his ancient relationship with the horse. The myth of Poseidon's union with Demeter in the form of a mare, which gave birth to Orion, is an Arcadian myth that had very old roots. There is no doubt that the coin type of Mantinia depicts Poseidon Hippios, but who is the second figure and which myth does the figure refer to? According to Pausanias, a new sanctuary of Poseidon Hippios was built by Adrian just outside Mantinea, where Adrian instituted the horse races in honor of Antinos. The new temple was constructed at a safe distance of the ancient shrine, avoiding any contact with it. Pausanias describes the temple and mentions a myth that illuminates the coin type we are discussing. The ancient sanctuary of Poseidon Hippios, says Pausanias, was built from oak wood by two well-known architects, Trophonios and Aramides. Entry to the temple was forbidden, even though there was no barrier, just a thread of wool. This thread was supposed to have magical powers, and no one had dared to cross it. When Epitos, son of Hippotheos, former king of Arcadia, disobeyed the will of the god and entered the sacred shrine, the god's anger exploded, huge waves appeared, blinded them, and finally killed them. Epitos was punished for his impiety with his own life. This mythical episode, since known at the time of Pausanias, is no doubt reflected on the Severan monetary type. The angry god is threatening Epitos with his trident, and Epitos flees while turning back to look at his persecutor. The allusion to the god's anger that produced destructive waves is the mythological topos, also encountered in Eliki, a coastal city in Achaia. The demolition of the city by a natural phenomenon, probably a tsunami, gave rise to a myth according to which the catastrophe was linked to the anger of Poseidon Heliconius this time. The myth is evoked by Strabo, who recounts that in his time nothing remained of the city except a statue of Poseidon in the middle of the sea. According to the geographer, the god was not holding a dolphin, but a seahorse. The revival of interest in the cult of Poseidon Hippios at Mantinea must be linked to Adrian, who rebuilt the god's temple and inaugurated the horse races in honor of Antinos in the hippodrome not far from the temple. And the emperor's concern that the new building should not touch the ancient shrine, as Pausanias clearly mentions, shows familiarization with the ancient myth. The handsome boy from Bithynia, Antinos, was honored in Mantinea since the Bithynians claimed to have Arcadian roots. The famous coins bearing the name of Venturios bear witness to this, and the same type of horse, an allusion to the horse races known as Antinoia, was engraved on Severan coins. You see here the obverse and reverse of a coin, clearly of Mantinea, clearly referring to these games with a horse type. In Arcadia, we encounter another, certainly less enigmatic mythological scene that appears on coins of the year. Atalante, piercing the boar with her spear, no doubt a representation of Calydon's hunt. Once again, the scene is set in a wood, indicating a sacred place. According to the Arcadian version of the myth, Atalante was the daughter of Iasos, son of Lycurgos of Tegea, and descendant of Arcas. As Iasos did not want a daughter, he abandoned her in the forests of Arcadia, where she was fed by a bear and rescued by hunters. She became a formidable hunter who refused men and distinguished herself at the boar hunt of Calydon in Turia. The scene of the boar hunt that decorated the east pediment of the temple of Athena Alea at Tegea was the work of the famous 4th century sculptor Skopas of Paros and has been described in detail by Pausanias. The sculptures on the pediment are preserved very mutilated, so we do not have the full composition. Archaeologists therefore refer to the numismatic type for a possible reconstruction of the figure of Atalante on the pediment. But even if the representation of the coin is not exact, which is very often the case, It is legitimate to assume that the appearance of the type of Atalante hunting wild boar on Tejean coins was inspired by the famous sculptures from the 4th century BC, which were still in place. And although the mint of the Caledonian boar is very well known and represented on many coinages, the specific iconographic type has, as far as I'm aware, no parallel on coins. The myth is in many cases represented with a boar pierced by a spear, as, for example, at Ephesus. The variation with Atalante is unique, an element that further strengthens the connection between the coin type and the sculptures on the temple's eastern pediment, and therefore the very local aspect of this coin type. If now we move to the region of Megaris, we find Agostana, a small port in the north of the region overlooking the Corinthian Gulf. The town flourished since the Hellenistic period, and its fortifications, probably dated to the time of Demetrius Poliorcetes, are among the most impressive surviving fortifications in Greece. The town minted twice in its long history, and only in bronze. First as member of the Achaean koinon in the mid-2nd century BCE, and then under the Severans. It was rarely mentioned by ancient authors, but it was visited by Pausanias. Its location is firmly confirmed by inscriptions discovered in situ. Pausanias mentions Agostana only to allude to the cult of Melampus and the annual festivals held in his honor. Melampus was a legendary soothsayer and healer who asserted that his power as seer derived from the Egyptians and that he could understand the language of animals. The importance of his sanctuary at Agostana is confirmed by epigraphic evidence. The round building with a tree surrounded by snakes emerging from its roof that appears on Severan issues may very well represent the sanctuary of Melampus, the Melambodium. This is another very rare coin. This is a photo of a cast of a coin in the Athenian Museum. We need to certainly need to get a better photo of this, but you can see the round building, and this is a tree emerging from its roof, and these round animals are the snakes that circle the tree. The round building with a tree surrounded by snakes emerging from its roof that appears on the Severian coins may very well represent the sanctuary of Melampus, the Melambodium. The story told by Apollodorus seems to illustrate our monetary type very well. I quote, "In front of the house of Melampus, there was an oak tree with a nest of snakes. The servants killed the snakes, but Melampus saved and brought up the newborns. When the little ones grew up, they gave him the power to understand the language of the animals and to foresee the future." The tree surrounded by snakes on our coin can only allude to this myth. Another coin type from this same town is more difficult to interpret. It shows a child being fed by a goat. The abandoned child fed by an animal is another common topos in many mythologies, and several Peloponnesian issues of the imperial period allude to it. At Aegion, the child represents Zeus, and the cave where he was raised and his sacred animal, the eagle, are present on the coin type. You see that this is the representation of the cave, and the eagle's up here, and the child here suckling from the animal. On coins of Epidaurus, the child fed by a goat represents Asclepius, and according to the version of the myth narrated by Pausanias again, a shepherd discovered the child guarded by a dog. The affinity with the monetary type is striking and leaves no doubt as to identity of the child on the coin type at Epidaurus. But what about the similar type at the Agostana? It has been suggested that it represents Melampus, but we know no myth referring to Melampus as an abandoned child. Eric Zimmern has suggested Oedipus, abandoned and brought up on the Kytheron, the mountain north of the town of Agostana, that separates the Megaris from Boeotia. This is still an hypothesis, since no source associates Oedipus with the city of Agostina. But whatever the hero depicted on the Severan coins, and the relationship between the name of the animal, Ega in Greek is the goat, and the name of the town, Agostina, is certainly no coincidence. One might imagine that the inhabitants of Agostina used the iconographic type of the divine child fed by the goat to allude to the name of their own town and emphasize the location of the cult. They played with words and used etymology to make their case. The use of cults and myths is a well-known phenomenon for the creation of civic and religious identity of communities in the imperial era. The search for roots in an illustrious Greek past was a way for the cities to add prestige to a less glorious present. For communities outside mainland Greece, this often led to the relocation of myths, for example, from Eleusis to Hierapolis or Nyssa, or from Delos to Ephesus, where the cities could present arguments that seemed plausible. But the Peloponnese was a privileged region in this respect, since a very large number of Greek myths and cults were originally located there. The regeneration of this mythology and its use in civic and often political life reached its apogee under Adrian and certainly continued until the great changes of the Roman world in the 3rd century. Peloponnesian coinage confirms this phenomenon and shows, on the whole, a continuity of iconographic tradition from Adrian to the Severans. What changed in the Severan period was the increase in the number of types and their variants, a difference that can be explained, at least in part, but not wholly, by the dramatic increase in the number of issuing authorities. Until the 2nd century, the religious life of provincial towns was run by their notables. Members of the provincial elites were granted magistracies to maintain the temples and sanctuaries, embellish them with new buildings and statues, to organize local, regional, or pan-Hellenic games, and to offer sacrifices in honor of local deities. People from the same social class, men and women, served as priests, a position that became hereditary. The epigraphic record of Sparta, moreover, proves that the local elites showed a special interest in taking charge of cults that were essential components of civic identity, such as, for example, the cult of Dioscuri, Sparta. For the purpose of our interest, it suffices to point out that representations of Dioscuri or of their attributes were permanent features on Lacedaemonian issues. It is the Dioscuri that are chosen as a reverse type on the coins signed by Eurykles, hegemon of Sparta, in the Augustan era. In addition to the many myths illustrated on Peloponnesian coins, we could add a few rare examples of representations of religious rituals. On coins from Erimione in the Argolid, we find the scene of a man driving a puppet. The type had long been known to Friedrich, Imhoff Blumer, and Percy Gardner, who had already made the connection with the Chthonian, a religious festival in honor of Demeter Chthonian. Just a moment, excuse me, it's a phone. Yeah. So, Tonia, yes. According to Pausanias, a procession in honor of the goddess, Demeter Chthonian, that is, which is Demeter of the underworld, you could say, took place every summer in Erimione. The priests and annual magistrates marched at the head, followed by men, women, and children. All were dressed in white and wore wreaths of flowers, probably hyacinths. The procession was followed by men who separated a cow from the herd and led it towards the temple, choosing a mature, fierce, and stubborn animal. It was set free to enter the temple, where it was sacrificed by old women. There is no doubt that the monetary type of Hermione refers to the procession described by Pausanias. The type we have just presented is exceptional because it does not represent a deity, its shrine, or its attribute, as is usually the case. Instead, it depicts a ritual that took place in the city and is one of the rare cases where an ordinary person is depicted on a coin. Epigraphic evidence also survives for this ritual, attesting its existence since the Hellenistic period. According to the inscription, the citizens of the neighboring town of Asini took part in Hermione's festival by offering a cow for sacrifice so that the two cities renewed their friendship and kinship through this ceremony. If the interpretation of the iconographic type at Hermione is assured by literary sources, what can be said of another enigmatic type that appears both at Cleone and at Sicyon? Shows a long-haired, bearded male head mounted on a horse. The horse has a saddle and reins. The type is known from numismatic catalogues, and is described simply as human head on a horse, or human head driving a horse. It might be assumed that this is a representation of a deity, but iconographic parallels are very hard to find. Representations of head of a deity placed on an animal are fairly common for serapes. They are found, for example, on Alexandrian issues with the god's head on an eagle or on a ram. From an iconographic point of view, our type also evokes another Alexandrian type, where a horse walking to the right with the reins and saddle, exactly as the Peloponnesian coins, is surmounted by Agathodemon in the form of a snake. Or in another variant, Agathodemon on the head of Serapis. But even if the Peloponnesian coin type has a certain Egyptian allusion, it is still difficult to see the head of Serapis on a horse. Serapis on the horse. Serapis is always covered with a kalapos, an attribute that is absent from our coins. This bearded head with long hair may refer to another male divinity, such as Zeus, Pluto, Asclepius, or even Poseidon, and a divinity, as we have seen, is closely related to the horse. But no iconographic parallel or literary source can confirm this analysis. An unpublished coin from the Vienna collection offers another perspective on the interpretation of the type. On the obverse is a portrait of Julia Donna, and on the reverse a male head on a horse, as on the type described above, with a human figure leading it by the reins. The coin is classified at Cleone, and although the legend is not visible, the attribution seems very likely. The iconographic variation with a figure leading the horse suggests that the scene refers to a religious procession, as is that depicted at the neighboring city of Hermione. The coin of Sicyon is stylistically very close to that of Cleone, and both appear to have been engraved by the same hand. And we do know that these coins were often minted in common worship and used the same engravers. But perhaps, the reproduction of the type, but the hypothesis that the reproduction of the type was an error or an initiative taken by an engraver is something that I would hesitate to suggest. We often find identical or similar iconographic types in neighboring cities, and this is often related to the rivalry over the control of some local sanctuary. Although we have no such evidence in the case of Cleone and Sicyon, the numismatic evidence allows us to hold this hypothesis. The city of Cleone produced another iconographic type, which is of interest to our discussion. An eagle with open wings standing on a sippus, that would be a small pillar here, on the top of a rocky hill or mountain. The type is certainly a reference to the cult of Zeus Apesantios, worshipped on the summit. And here we go. On the summit of the homonymous hill to the northeast of Cleone, within the territory of the city. You can see this is the summit where Zeus was worshipped, as you can see it from the sanctuary. Cleone, a small town renowned for the piety of its inhabitants, chose an iconographic type that emphasized the locality of the cult. It is not the image of any Zeus, but of their Zeus, worshipped on their mountain. And finally, if we do return to Argos, we find the type of Heracles sitting on a rock, wearing a lion skin and holding a club. According to Marquetti, Heracles' posture is reminiscent of the Roman type of Heracles Invictus. Even if the typology is of Roman inspiration, the significance is purely local. Behind the hero, we see the same hill with the eagle that we saw at Cleone. You can see the rock here and the pillar and the eagle. This is an allusion to the same sanctuary of Zeus Apesantios on the hill of the mountain of the same name, and Heracles has been associated with Mount Apesas on a number of occasions. Here again, we may see a certain rivalry between the two cities. And it should be remembered that in very ancient times, Cleone controlled the sanctuary of Nemea and its Panhellenic games. Once again, memory and the use of the past could have played a role for the choice of these types. And I thank you very much for